right, let's get started. I have 4:30 on my clock. Thank you for joining us for our very first round of lightning talks for SUNYLA 2020. We are having 4 presenters that will be doing brief 10-minute or less presentations back to back. We'll be holding all questions until the end to ensure our presenters have enough time. Even though we'll be answering questions at the end, attendees are encouraged to submit your questions through the Q&A as presentations are held. Ask them when you have them. Please enter your questions to presenters through the Q&A, not the chat, but please feel free to share your own relevant links and other information with your fellow attendees through the chat. Our first presentation is Click Here, a Primo usability study at SUNY New Paltz by Jennifer Rutner. Jennifer is a senior assistant librarian at SUNY New Paltz Sojourner Truth Library, where she serves on the research and education team. Jennifer, the floor is yours and your time starts now.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Let me just pull up my presentation. Okay, it looks like we're ready to go. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm Jennifer Rutner. As Jocelyn said, I work in the reference and education team at the SUNY New Paltz Library. First, I would like to thank the team at the SUNY New Paltz Library that came together to work on this Primo usability project, particularly Anne, Christy, and Yvonne, who implemented the changes and dealt with all of the technical aspects of this process. I served as the project manager for the project and also conducted the usability studies with students. And I have a background and training in conducting usability testing in a library setting. So I don't want to get too into the process of how we did this project. I'd rather focus on the results, but I would be happy to answer any questions about the process that we used at the end of the session. The one thing that I do want to say is that I found that it's really important to focus any research project or inquiry on questions that staff have about the interface or how our users will interact with that interface, and really drawing direct questions to what we are curious about. So what we settled on is a set of priorities that we were interested in, and many of them focused on terminology and labeling. So we were looking at some of the defaults that came with Primo and wondering how those would translate for our users. And then we were also interested in functionality. And would the functionality meet the expectations of our users? And, you know, is the interface easy enough to learn as you go so users can navigate a task that they may not have done before? So for the actual test, we were able to recruit 6 student participants for the testing, and we reserved a table in the student union building to conduct the sessions and just invited people over to participate. There's a little bit of information here about the participant profiles, and I feel pretty good about the overall diversity of the group that participated. So let's get to the results. What did we learn? One of the main things that we were interested in is the search scopes, i.e. like the buckets of stuff that people can search in, those defaults that we provide. And overall, participants accurately described or guessed at what were in these different buckets, even including SUNY Catalog, which was a totally new service for us. The term everything, of course, posed a problem, as participants each had a different description of what this might include. The librarians were also not a huge fan of it. So we've changed this to books, articles, and more, which I've seen used on other library websites. I just put in a quick note here at the end that since we've gone remote only, we now default to online resources, which is a new category that we've added to our search. So one of the biggest surprises for me, as participants were describing what they thought each of these different buckets meant and the different terminology that we use, was that no one really had any sense of what course reserves was, and none of the participants, besides the one who works in the library, had used course reserves before. So that didn't necessarily speak to any barriers with the interface, but it was just very surprising to me. Overall, the results screen, so once they did a search and then were viewing the results, didn't present any significant barriers to access. All of the participants were able to navigate the results screen and explore and choose appropriate materials based on the information presented. We were particularly interested in the facets on the left-hand side of the results screen and the ease of using facets. Several participants successfully navigated the facets, and some even combined multiple facets. The date limits didn't work exactly as participants expected, particularly in the advanced search screen. You can see with the format here, as librarians, we know that this is because of journal holdings, but the ideal down at the bottom, you can see is kind of a from year to year. And this was what most participants expected. And some even said, oh, there it is. Once we got to the results screen and they saw this format for the date limitations. So we've made some changes to how the date range limit is presented on the advanced search screen, but it's still not ideal. So item records. From the item records screen, we observed a number of barriers to access. The majority of participants were able to click through to access a full text PDF or an article. Only 2 participants were able to complete placing a request for a book from the item record. Signing in was the biggest barrier to successful access to materials from the item record. Participants really wanted to avoid clicking on that sign in button. One participant noted that they want to avoid opening another screen. We did observe participants thoroughly exploring the entire screen and reviewing all of the options presented. And some even spent several minutes trying different strategies, which they might not do if they weren't sitting next to a librarian. We've been able to change some of the language on the screen, and we hope that this helps make it clear the path to accessing the full text, which lives in these databases and not in Primo. But it's definitely still not ideal. So placing a SUNY resource share request was the task that presented the most challenges for participants. Each participant started on the same record, which is the one that we see here, and was asked how they would get a physical copy of the item. We've turned off the SUNY resource share option since that service isn't available during remote access. So you can't, the screenshot is not accurate to what the participants were using. 2 participants were successful in placing requests, but one actually had a cheat, as the previous student who had participated in the usability test was still signed into their account. So this removed the need to navigate the sign-in step of the process. So to me, this felt like a very clear message. I don't want to sign in. There was also some confusion where folks thought, I'm on campus, so I don't need to sign in. I know that when I'm off campus, I need to sign in, but now I'm on campus, so why do I have to sign in? So the sign-in was a significant barrier for a number of participants, both in the menu at the top of the screen and in the item records. We've changed the sign-in terminology to My Library Account, and we also learned that this is a universal change throughout the system, so we couldn't have it different terms on an item record versus in the top menu. But we hope this provides more clarity on why people would want to take the step of signing in and what exactly they are signing into. We also learned that the library card terminology in the My Library account menu was confusing for participants once they had signed in. Some said, you know, I thought I didn't need a library card. I thought my ID was my library card. Like, what is this thing? We were also, and this is, I think, one of the most significant changes that we made, we were able to turn on a feature that picks up a student's sign-in when they sign into their My New Paltz account, and it will carry that login information into Primo. So they are already logged into Primo and into My Library account when they get to Primo if they've already signed in through My New Paltz. And so that really just removes one of the biggest barriers of having to click on that sign in, that My Library account, and log in to something to get to the items that you're looking for. And then finally, our help page or help features. So we had just implemented the help tab, and it looked, you can see at the top what it looked like with the little bubbles. When we asked students how they would get help, if they needed help using the library's website and using Primo, a couple students said I would go to the library and ask for help, and then I asked them if they'd ever done that before, and they said no. Some students said they would ask a friend or a professor, but some students noticed the tab and said, like, oh, I would click on the tab, and what would you expect? Well, they would expect a live chat, much like what you would see on an e-commerce site. So I think we decided that that graphic was that icon was a little misleading, and we've changed it to the question mark. This leads to our general Ask a Librarian page that offers all different modes of communication with the library. So
and Jennifer, I'm sorry to jump in, but we're at the 10-minute mark. So
yeah, thanks. That's my last slide. That's it.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you did have questions, but again, we'll save those to the end. So we're going to go right into our next presentation. And thank you, Jennifer, very much. Our next presentation comes to us from Andrea Kingston. The title of her presentation is Cultivating Collaborative Global Learning in the Library, the UN Sustainable Development Goals in 17 Study Rooms. Andrea is the Digital Initiatives and Special Projects Librarian at Monroe Community College. And Andrea, the floor is yours whenever you're ready. And I'll start your time now.
Share my screen here. Hi, everyone. I am going to talk briefly about a project that we did in the library that emphasized collaborative global learning and used the UN Sustainable Development Goals as sort of the nexus of the project. In case you're not familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they're part of what the UN calls the Agenda for Sustainable Development for 2030. They were adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2015, and they're a set of 17 interconnected goals that address such global challenges as poverty, hunger, climate change, various environmental issues, as well as things like infrastructure. So here are all 17 goals, nicely aligned here. These graphics are freely downloadable from the UN. So if you end up using the goals in any of your projects, that's a great resource. So when I looked at the goals, I realized that just about every one is somehow connected to our curriculum. And there have been some SUNY global learning initiatives that have used the goals as a basis. For example, the SDGs in 17 Rooms was an online project where it was an online event actually, where there were 17 rooms set up, each one dedicated to one of the goals, based on a Brookings Institution and Rockefeller Foundation initiative. And people could digitally enter the rooms during a specific time and have an online conversation. I believe they used Padlet to communicate. The SUNY COIL is also just this summer launching a Global Commons initiative because students can't travel abroad right now. So they're doing a virtual travel abroad using the Sustainable Development Goals as a basis for the project, where the students are learning storytelling and all about the goals, and then partnering with an NGO in another country and learning about that country and using their storytelling skills to create some kind of message for the NGO, for example, a commercial or print ad or that kind of thing, outreach of some kind, based on the Sustainable Development Goals topic. So really cool project there, and they're creating OER for that project as well. So at MCC, building global engagement and understanding is part of our mission. It's right there in our mission statement. And we have a Global Education and International Services Department that works to promote and support global learning as well. So it's definitely on everyone's radar. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals in 17 study rooms was a project where we have over 17 study rooms. So we invited students and faculty and staff, but primarily students, to adopt one of the study rooms, which was each one was devoted to a sustainable development goal, such as here you see quality education is number 4. And we asked them to transform the room however they want. The only guidelines were they couldn't physically destroy anything, make any permanent changes, but install some kind of information that delivers a message about the goal they chose and communicates that information to the campus community. And a lot of the time, faculty had a say in how the students were doing it because they incorporated it into their classes as an assignment, usually a group project. So the students often were left to come up with some ideas, but it was driven by a class's course learning objectives in the end. So we managed to find faculty for whom something like this aligned very well with what they were either already doing in their classes or had wanted to do in their classes. So this was inspired by that digital Sustainable Development Goals in 17 rooms, but it works a little bit differently. It's tied to the curriculum, and it emphasizes group collaboration and global learning, which are 2 high impact practices. And any class, club, committee, or other group could participate. We had everyone from our college success courses signing on to biology classes, global health classes, of course. We had some HVAC classes that were interested. And we had one committee, campus committee for faculty, our sustainability committee, of course, who were interested in presenting about the environmental efforts they've made on campus as far as our buildings and infrastructure go. We had the Student Sustainability Club was planning on and doing the installation about plastic in the oceans. So it really was across the map as far as what people came up with. The information was to be on view all year. So not only could it be incorporated in coursework as an initial assignment, but once the installation was on view, a course could use that installation as the basis for an assignment as well, learning from that installation or from all of them, and then incorporating that information into their class. So the plan was to culminate in a walking tour of all 17 study rooms during International Education Week. And as far as implementation requirements go, I collaborated with our Global Learning Department, which was a very easy process because they're great. Created a brief LibGuide to explain what the goals are and what the project was. I created calls for participation to faculty and students and created some posters based on those graphics from the UN and hung them around the library. Met with faculty to talk about possibilities for incorporating this project in their classes, and visited classes as well as clubs and committees and that sort of thing. As far as some more librarian-y type things, of course, I offered to support student research on their topic and to coordinate their access to the room, since you have to check out a study room, help make sure that they could get to the study room and get that key. and to help them with materials they wanted to include in the room. We had a small budget for things like printing and that kind of thing, and then plan the walking tour. So unfortunately, the project was derailed by our sudden campus closure due to the pandemic. I tried to think of a way to transform it into a digital project, but it really did lend itself in this particular case more to an on-campus project. So I'd be working with the global ed people again when we reopen to relaunch it and to have that walking tour and to have that installation in the library. But overall, I found it was a great way to engage students with the library, to make them feel a bit of ownership as far as adopting a study room. And then it just aligns so perfectly with our curriculum in so many ways that I was very encouraged by that. So I'd like to invite you to think about how the Sustainable Development Goals align with your curriculum and how you might do something similar. Might not be exact, you might not have 17 study rooms, but there are so many other options to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals into the library and to encourage students to explore them a bit. So I'm going to show a very short video. It's like 90 seconds, and then I'll wrap up. So thanks for attending this lightning talk. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the end of all of 4 of the talks, or please feel free to email me at akingston4@monroecc.edu. Thanks a lot.
Right, thank you, Andrea. Right, we are going to move on to our third presenter. The title of this presentation is Building Inclusive Spaces Through Drag at Stony Brook University. Our presenter is Claire Payne. She is the Web Services and Data Librarian at Stony Brook University. Her interests include user design, equity, and visual culture. Claire, whenever you're ready, and I will start your time now.
All right, I want to thank you all for joining us for these lightning talks today. I'm going to go ahead and open. I always make slides available. There are a few links and resources in here just in case you want to follow along there. I also want to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you during Pride Month and during really a critical moment of racial reckoning in this country as a cis white woman. And while this is a lightning talk and I unfortunately don't have time to outline a full history of drag, nor am I at all an expert on that area, I do think it's critical to acknowledge that trans women of color, and particularly Black trans women, were and are integral to the fight for LGBTQ civil rights in the US, and that our modern idea of what drag is really indebted to underground Black queer cultures. I just want to make sure that when we talk about producing this kind of fun library programming, we also recognize the labor and the resistance that got us here. So with that said, a lot of you are probably familiar with Drag Queen Story Hour, which is what I'm specifically going to talk about today. But for those of you who are not, a little bit of context. DQSH is where drag queens come to libraries to read books and lead other typical storytime activities like songs and figure plays, usually in public libraries and usually for kids. The first event was organized in 2015 in San Francisco by queer author Michelle T and a nonprofit called Radar Productions. And since then, it's really rapidly spread across the country. The official Drag Queen Story Hour network has over 50 affiliate local organizations, including one on Long Island, which is where Stony Brook is located. But you'll also see events not affiliated with that network. Why do we do this? Why Drag Queen Story Hour? It's not just reading books. It gives kids these really glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. So that's all well and good, but some of you might be asking, why would we want to do an event like this in an academic library where we don't traditionally work with children, offer story times, any of that good stuff? So what I want to propose to you is that there are lots of reasons we might want to do this. Again, we have to think of DQSH as much more than just reading to kids. It's instead a sort of well-known library event, library land event that we can operationalize in really meaningful ways. So I've put some of those on the screen, right? It's a chance to explicitly invite marginalized communities into your spaces. It's a way to provide your students with a chance to relax and, feel like kids again. It's a way to make clear your allyship with queer and trans communities on your campus. And it can be a way to draw an audience for frank discussions on big issues like gender and sexuality and identity and performance. I'm going to talk through how we framed our first Drag Queen Story Hour event around all these points. But I want to highlight we're not the only ones who've done this in a university setting. I've heard about successful programs at the University of Arkansas, Webster University, and the University of North Florida, just to name a couple of examples. So how did we do it? I like to say with lots of help and lots of collaboration. Our Drag Queen Story Hour involved a lot of conversation. And I also say Drag Queen Story Hours on this slide. I'll talk about that at the end of this presentation. So the steps towards making this a reality. My colleague Laurel Scheinfeld, who I think is on this event today, brought this idea to our communications and outreach working group as an idea for something fun we could do in the library, maybe partner with other groups on campus. She'd talked a little bit to the folks in Florida who'd hosted Drag Queen Story Hour events at a college. And around the same time as this, we'd recently had a tour of the newish LGBTQ Center on our campus as part of our library liaison retreat. And with that energy, I'd volunteered as a new librarian at Stony Brook to serve as the library liaison to that center. And I was already in communication with them, so we agreed I'd take point on this project with the support also of Stacy Harath, who was the chair of our Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee, as well as our Communications and Outreach Working Group. So we had a group of folks at the library who were interested in this work. So to kind of start out, I sent an email to the head of the center feeling out the collaboration. They really liked the idea and assigned a really wonderful actual undergraduate student worker to work with us to bring this together. So we had to iron out details like selecting reading day as a day of our event so that we could tell students we were going to read to them instead. At the urging of our student team members, we decided to actually add an explicit academic or educational side to the event, which grew into a panel on gender and performance, which you see a picture of there on the right. We agreed that the libraries would host and LGBTQ services would moderate the panel, cross-promote with us, and table at the same time as the event. Our interim dean signed off and gave us money for refreshments. So all we really needed was a drag queen and panelists. This ended up working out really, really well at our institution. So the LGBTQ Center reached out to Annie Maneldew, who's a Stony Brook student and a local drag queen who was really interested in coming on board and working with us on this event. I then reached out to the official Drag Queen Story Hour Long Island affiliate. And as it turned out, Annie was already DQSH affiliated, worked closely with the person I'd been contacting there. And both of those folks agreed to be on our panel alongside the student who we'd actually been working with all along. So on the day of, everything really went off without a hitch. Here are Annie and Bella Noche from Drag Queen Story Hour Long Island opening our event, and then our 3 post storytime panelists. So what did we come away with? We were relatively well attended. We had about 30 folks who, who made it there, excuse me, which we thought was a pretty good amount during the reading period. We didn't have any kids who joined us, but we figured you should always be prepared for kids, even if you don't invite them at an event like this. We had no negative feedback. The only negative response was folks who wished it had been marketed more intensely. We didn't have any protesters or angry patrons, anything like that. And lessons learned, despite having communicated with other campuses that had done this and working with lots of folks, we of course had some things that came up during the planning process and the event itself that gave us many things to think about, which I have here. So if you're thinking of doing something like this on your campus, I've kind of broken it down into 3 main considerations. First, do you have buy-in from the relevant stakeholders at your institution? This means, do you have, the permissions needed? Everyone knows their own campus best. For us, our dean was on board, so that kind of took care of what we needed. But the question also encompasses communicating with LGBTQ centers and queer groups on campus. You hear the saying, nothing about us without us, making sure that we're incorporating folks who are invested in doing this work in any kind of activity or performance that involves them. Point 2, how will you support queer communities at this event? Thinking about where's the closest all-gender bathroom to your space where you're going to hold something? Where can your presenters get ready or finish getting ready if needed? Are you prepared to deal with any protesters or backlash that may arise? If you're thinking about calling campus security in that case, what kind of relationships do your attendees have with those institutions? Is it possible you can anonymize registration for your event? All of these things are important to kind of keep in mind. Also, we're at a library, right? How are you providing access to other important information resources during this time? Again, these kind of partnerships can be really critical across the campus. And then the third point I want to point out is, have you budgeted for this? So we've been lucky enough to do this for free because we had a student performer and eager volunteers, though we did invest money for refreshments and library swag for our gifts. But in the future, we anticipate paying the going rate, which can be a couple of $100s for this kind of event. Drag takes a lot of time and energy on the part of the performer, and we want to always make sure we're respecting that investment with a financial contribution. So next steps at Stony Brook. We want to make sure we continue to build relationships and offer inclusive, community-oriented programming, which is a big job. So we really want to kind of make use of this goodwill and connections with these folks on our campus to continue to look at events that reflect the realities and experiences of folks who are active users of the LGBTQ Center. We took the first step towards this with our quarantine reading period, Drag Queen Story Hour, which we did over Zoom a few weeks ago. It also went pretty well and had about 30 attendees and had basically the same outcomes as our in-person ones. We were really satisfied with that. And again, hoping we can continue to use that momentum. So that's all that I have. I've put my Twitter and email there for questions and comments. I'm happy to chat at the end or over these interfaces about Drag Queen Story Hour, events like the SEER Libraries, community partnerships, or anything like that. So thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you, Claire. Appreciate it. Very interesting. Timer going off. Okay, and our fourth presentation is titled "Take Care: Collaborating, with your Campus Counseling Center" by Kate Bellady. Kate is a research and education librarian and interim reference program coordinator at the Sojourner Truth SUNY New Paltz. She teaches information literacy instruction and serves as the library liaison across departments. Whenever you're ready, Kate, I will start your time.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Kate Bellady. I'm a research and education librarian at SUNY New Paltz. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes this afternoon talking about the value of building a partnership between the library and your counseling services on campus to support students' mental health. I am going to talk a little bit about why it's important and some initiatives that can come from it. My alternate title, something like this: why it is imperative that we actively support students' mental health and how to get started. I would be remiss to do a presentation like this and not acknowledge the moment that we're in and how it's creating a more urgent need for this awareness. So in the next few minutes, I am going to focus a little bit more on the why than I normally might. Our students show up to the library and campus as whole people who experience challenges personally and academically, whole people who are in a time of transition and exploration. More recently, they may be working through the traumas of violence against the Black community, prevailing systemic racism, or the impacts of COVID-19. When we return for the fall semester, in whatever form that may be, our students are going to show up with these lived experiences, just like we will. Mental health issues are already prevalent on college campuses. I have a very, very small selection of headlines I'm going to rattle on about for a second from academic sources, from the APA. 1 in 3 college freshmen worldwide reports mental health disorder. Perfectionism among young people significantly increased since 1980s. Excessive desire to succeed, compete with others may have a negative impact on youth psychological health. Student mental health in the midst of COVID-19, a call for further research and immediate solutions. Trans students often struggle with mental health. Gender nonconforming students are 4 times more likely than peers to report mental health issues such as depression and suicide, according to a new study that calls for more campus supports. Racial identity, self-esteem, and the imposter phenomenon among African American college students. Financial stress, social supports, gender, and anxiety during college. And a study, mental illness exacts heavy toll beginning in youth. So you can see a lot of the research has been done that explores it specifically to students and college. More broadly, a report in 2016, National Alliance on Mental Illness and the JED Foundation found that 1 in 5 youth and young adults experiences a mental health condition. 75% of all lifetime mental health conditions begin by age 24, and 30% of college students reported feeling so down at some point during the previous year that they found it difficult to function. Before I jump into this partnership aspect, I want to encourage everyone listening today to start with a conversation with your trusted library pals and colleagues around how to support students' mental health if you haven't done that already. I think you'll be able to find collaborators in the library. Jen, who you heard from a little earlier, is one of my closest collaborators in this space. And you'll be able to integrate it in places you may not expect and make this kind of language and this empathy part of the library culture and how we engage with our communities. Emotional health is a key to academic success. There are tons of webinars, resources, other research. Everything that you see on these slides is a link that's embedded into it. So when you get the PDFs, there is research. And I am absolutely able to suggest others if anyone is interested. So where do we come in? We are already centered as a familiar resource and support on campus. We can extend this to this aspect of the student experience. We have space, staff and expertise, a collection and resources, and we're comfortable. We are often where the students are and where they express and experience frustration. So we can use our strengths to encourage wellness and connect students with mental health and community resources. Now I'm going to jump into the partnership aspect. Most of what I am going to share today comes from my work with the Psychological Counseling Center, or the PCC, as they're known on the SUNY New Paltz campus. I am their library liaison, so a lot of these initiatives come from that relationship. So the first question we want to ask is, do you have access to a counseling or health center, a social worker, any kind of mental health services on your campus? Understanding that that may look different for everybody in the room today, but they are the people with training and expertise in this area. They can help you vet resources and understand issues that your community faces. Is a liaison relationship possible? This is a good segue from the previous presenter and talking about liaising with departments that are not academic, whether or not that's something you already do or you can have a designated partnership. So this can be scalable. You don't have to propose anything big and new to get started. Present what you already offer, what you do in the library. We're essentially just pitching the library to a different place specific to their needs. In my case, the Counseling Center was receptive because they were actually working on kind of campus visibility, removing the stigma of getting counseling, and reaching students who may be intimidated to go over to the Counseling Center. So they wanted to work on different ways to remove barriers. So this has been a really mutually beneficial relationship. With the understanding that we are all stretched in lots of directions, this could also be a single meeting. It could be a conversation about who your students are, the issues that they're facing, and that can help inform your work and your interactions. And then you have another contact on campus. I started my liaison relationship with counseling by having a meeting with them in the summer, and we sat down for the afternoon and just talked about who our students are, what they see, where our needs and services meet. And it was one of the most rewarding meetings I've participated in. So what can it look like? We can incorporate mental health support into tons of stuff we already do. In the next minute, I'm going to tell you about things you already know, things you probably already do, but I want to encourage you to consider them from a mental health lens and that kind of perspective. Resources. We can provide reference services and support for our counselors. I've helped with their personal research or research that is informing some of the things coming up in their field, and their students. If they encounter a student, I've had this happen in a couple of different ways, but a student may say, I need to get help and I don't know how to do it and I don't want to go into the library and all manner of things. They can say, the Counseling Center has a friend in the library. Her name is Kate. We're going to tell her you're coming. You can email her if you want to. So I can kind of take it from there and make them a little bit more comfortable with coming to this place. Reader's advisory. Students often request further reading and resources in their sessions. Our counselors were trying to do this work by themselves. And I said, that is where I can come in. So we developed a zine with recommended reading from our collection that they can use in sessions as a starting point, or they can at least get the students familiar with the idea that we have sources for them. Collection development. Learning about our students tells me what they like, and then I can go back to our collection and say, what do we have? What should we look for? One of the things I learned about our students, which was like a light bulb moment for me, and it does make sense, they wanted philosophy books, non-academic kinds of philosophy books. So I did look at our collection and I let people know. Research guides. You can share different kinds of resources, campus and community supports. I previously worked at a community college where there was one social worker and all of her referrals were in a binder that lived in her office. So we translated that onto a LibGuide that she could help, that was shareable. It was an internal platform for her that I also worked on and gave her research to support. Visibility, book displays and social media. I love a book display. It says we see you. You can cross-promote different things, cross-promote via your social media, and just having these kinds of sources pop up in places on the shelf, in your Instagram, is really helpful for saying this is something we value in the library. Book displays are also great passively because students, even if they're not taking them, may take photos of them and come back later. And lastly, programs. Counselors were looking to figure out ways to reach students who may not need formal counseling services, but they did need support. So I offered the library as a space for them to do existing events. Those included Let's Talk, which is like a casual conversation group, National Depression Screening Day, National Eating Disorder Association Awareness Week, where they either set up tables or use our space in different ways. We've also done collaborative events around exams. We did play therapy, and the counselors just brought a ton of toys, and we made a lot of noise, and it was super fun. Vision boards and coffee with a counselor, which is exactly what it sounds like. Counselors gave students coffee and just said hi. So through this collaboration, we can create an environment that supports the mental health and well-being of our community. We want to help them thrive academically, and we can also help them thrive personally. I am always happy to expand on initiatives, on workflows, have conversations about this work, so you are welcome to reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thanks, Kate. All right, let's move on to the Q&A portion. So our first presenter, Jennifer, you were responding to a few questions by text. Would you mind unmuting yourself and just kind of summarizing those questions and answers just so we can get it on the recording?
So one person had asked how we recruited participants for the usability studies. The one library student worker participant was very easy to recruit. And then from there, we reserved a table in the student union building during like lunch times when it would be a little bit busier. And we had 2 librarians at the table. So I was facilitating the usability test and waving at students and being like, hey, would you like to participate? And then my colleague was taking notes while we went, which proved to be very important because sometimes our video equipment did not work. Yeah, and we were also able to get a little bit of funding so that we could use Starbucks gift cards as an incentive. And then the other question was, were there any tests or discussion before the test about including sources that would help with starting research? So we really wanted to focus on Primo and certain functions in Primo. So we didn't want to kind of distract from that. So we really had them start from the Primo basics screen for all of the tasks that they completed in the study. And then there was a question about sampling. There's a lot out there. I wouldn't necessarily call it like sampling. A sample is a very specific like statistical thing. We just wanted to make sure that we didn't have like all biology majors or like all fine arts majors. You know, we wanted to have a good mix, and because we were doing, you know, our recruiting in a very public place, we were able to kind of navigate that very naturally, and it wasn't a challenge.
Thank you. In the chat, Claire Ehrlich also mentioned that shared the problem of students contacting the wrong person for help with library resources. So she mentioned the student support advisors at MVCC. They're kind of like the student help advisors. So obviously they help anything with the library resources. So they had to forward the question to us, but.
I guess I have one comment about that. I don't think that there's a wrong person for students to go to, and that, you know, the more outreach that libraries do on campus, the more we will get connected to those things. Starting about 10 years ago with millennials coming into college, we started seeing that they weren't relying on the more traditional or formal pathways to get help, right? With anything, you know, we saw like this broad social trend of students calling their parents and asking them like, what do I do about this paper that I have, you know, that kind of thing. So we know now that students go to a huge range of people depending on their personal preferences and previous experiences. So yeah, like in Claire's case, the person who was contacted knew how to hand off, and that's really what we want on campus.
Good point. Next question is for Andrea. Says it's so hard at our campus to get students to participate in these kind of programming initiatives. Pizza's always mentioned as absolute necessity. How do you get the motivation?
In this project, the motivation was that the project was tied to coursework and grades. It was incorporated into courses as a class project and part of their grade. So hence the participation. There were a few students who were not in classes who were in things like clubs. And in that case, it was a club project. So it was sort of peer motivation. We didn't have to buy any pizza.
And Fred shared a large piece about sustainability, his experience with that. I'm not seeing a question in here, Fred, but thank you for sharing. I'm going to copy and paste this if I can and put it in the chat. So maybe we can save this for others, but it's not allowing me to copy and paste this though. Fred, I don't know if you can share this in the chat. That way we can record the links that you have shared through the Q&A. Holly has a question for, Holly has a question for the counseling presentation. Were students willing to approach counselors in the library? For example, depression screening or for coffee with a counselor? Was the screening in a public place or a more private room?
Good question. So the depression screening is something they had done before. They have done some of these things in the student union building, but the library, the flow of traffic was just better for them. So we decided to try it there. With the depression screening, we set up a table in the lobby, and then if they wanted kind of further consultation, depending on how that had gone, they would go to a separate secluded area in a separate room. It was so well received. I was unsure about it at first. I was like, how open are they going to be? What's going to happen? That the counselors, we didn't get a chance to do it again. Unfortunately, I think it would have been this semester. But they were like, I don't even know if we need the back room. They all wanted to talk together and be in community in that way. And coffee with a counselor, it just looked like some friendly faces and coffee. So they weren't intimidated by approaching them at first. And the counselors in that instance, they also went with their grad assistant. So seeing other students was helpful. And they just wanted to say hi. They left it in the students' court how that interaction went. So it was a really casual way to just get their names and their faces out there. I'm gonna make a sweeping generalization first, just to say that in my past couple of years at New Paltz, I have noticed generationally much more openness to talk about a lot of this stuff. I have had students tell me I have to go to therapy first and then I'll be right over, or today sucks, my brain is not really where I need it to be, can I not come to work? So there is an openness that I had not seen until the last couple of years. And I think that is just part of changing and adding and removing stigma and the dialogue, and I could keep going, but they were really, really receptive, more so than we kind of realized they would be.
Very nice. Click on done with that. Fred, thank you for copying and pasting that in the chat. I see that was done. From the Purchase College Library, do we fully answer your question about the UN program? That. Okay, good. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm just checking out the chat. Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't think we had any other questions in the chat or Q&A. I'm going to open up the participant screen. Would anyone, if anyone wants to, say a few words or share anything verbally, feel free to let us know either through chat or any other way, and we'll be happy to unmute you if you want to share. Otherwise, No one does. We will break for the membership social that's officially starting in about 5 minutes. Lots of thank yous in the chat. Thank you for that. Okay. I'm just making sure we're not missing anybody that wants to speak. All right, well, thank you to all of our presenters. It's very enlightening. I hope to see you all at our membership social. You should have received the link by email. But I will see you later, hopefully in the membership. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Our presenters, if you could hold on just a second, I have to put you down back to attendee. Otherwise, if you show up in this track again, you're a panelist. So it'll be just a sec.
Mm-hmm. And Becky, could you save the chat since there was a lot of stuff shared on that?
Right. Yep.
Thank you very much.
As soon as you see you're an attendee, you can go. We all want to get our drinks ready.
All right. Thanks, Becky. Appreciate it.
No problem. I'll leave you as a panelist.
Okay.
Unless you don't want to be.
No.
Okay. See you in a bit.
All right.
I'm going to pause the recording until, we need it. Well, the meeting's not on here, right? It's not on track one. It's got its own thing, right?
It's got its own thing. And
Okay, so I could probably stop the recording then.
oh, yes, correct. Don't end yet because I see someone would like the link to the membership. So I'm going to send that through the chat. Just sure.
Sure, not a problem. I'll just stop the recording now.
Okay.